My name is Marcello Gortana, and this is Symon Oliver. We founded a digital consultancy and design company called Tennis. For the last 10 years or so, we've been doing a lot of digital transformation projects, design projects, and working a lot in technology. And we just thought that with the way things are changing and the rate of pace that technology and design is changing when it comes to web, that we would kind of record some of the conversations that we have on the kind of day to day and some of the projects and clients that we work with. I think this, we'll call it a podcast series, will probably take a couple different formats. We have some really great clients and people in our network that we want to interview as well. And sometimes just a discussion between Symon and myself. With this very first conversation, we wanted to kind of boil the ocean and try to define what design is, because there's still a lot of, I think, inconsistency in the way that people think of design in our space. And I think that there's still quite a lot of education that needs to happen. And there's a lot of assumptions about what design is. So it was just a really interesting conversation that we were having personally. And then we decided to kind of try to recap some of that conversation and record it, because I think it would be useful for some people out there.
I think a good disclaimer is design from the tennis perspective as well. What do we think design is? And I think it's a pretty interesting topic because there's a lot of latitude in terms of what other people think about it. It's very interpretive. It's got a rich history. It's kind of amorphous in the sense that design can be so many things, but depending on the field, it's hyper focused on solving certain challenges.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we should probably note is that we also have a bit of a different viewpoint on a lot of these topics, because we are practitioners, but also business owners and entrepreneurs. So I think we probably have maybe not very different, but I think the point is just that a lot of the kind of thought process that we have internally and a lot of the conversations are also biased by the fact that we own a business, a profitable business in the space. So a lot of the ways that we kind of think of design are probably also need to be considered in terms of like how you actually run a design organization.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. At a high level, we're basically talking about what design means to us. Design to me, in the context of our business, is it's planning. It's planning and then followed by the execution of that plan. And for me, it's not a lot about aesthetics. I think largely in my role, I do appreciate things that, are appealing visually, experientially. But at the end of the day, in my role, it often comes down to planning a project around business objectives and problem framing in order to, cascade that to other production team members who do focus on the execution and the aesthetics of things. But so yeah, if we compartmentalize, that's what it is for me. It's largely intangible in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we obviously both have a similar opinion on this, but I think that again, this question is it's a huge question with tons of nuances, but I think it's an interesting one because you're right. Like most people think that we talk to, especially if it's a potential new client or something, think of design as just like the aesthetic execution or output. And even that is not, I say most people, but it's really just depends on, I've noticed it depends a lot on like the sophistication of the challenge and the product that we're trying to build. So a smaller organization that's just looking for, brochureware type of website, for them, design is, I just want something that looks nice. And there's a place for that as well. And then as you kind of move up the chain of complexity, you start front loading more and more solutioning. And I'd say like the importance starts shifting more and more to the solutioning and planning. But then you also have, even within that, you have micro slices of potential products where like the aesthetic is very important because you're trying to achieve some sort of goal. So like if you think of like apps and products where organizations want you to spend money, aesthetic decisions can influence a whole range of behavioral decisions of audiences, right? So like the colors, the mood that you're setting, the interactions. Like I think of like when we were looking at Robinhood back in the GME phase where people were kind of like criticizing Robinhood as gambling because they had interactions where if you made a trade, they would like shoot confetti and there was a younger demographic that was using that trading platform. So I was thinking about, what is design, and it's built in out of four pillars, I think. There's research, problem identification, planning, and execution. And each one of those pillars goes really deep. Could be its own practice even, like you could have a practice that all you do is research, for instance. And a lot of UX firms do that.
And that's kind of what we were discussing in our own business too, like the segmentation between UX practitioner versus a UI practitioner. Like they're still T-shaped thinkers in their own domain, and they still do their own deep research and delivery of that work. But UX focused practice is quite distinct from a UI focused practice, and the challenges are very different, and the outcomes can also be different. Even aesthetics too. Just a side note, like the way it can define the value of a product as well. So things that feel a bit slicker feel more expensive. So you could deter your audience pretty quickly if it's a cost sensitive audience, if things look expensive, versus making something look affordable and accessible can also, deter other audiences.
I think Amazon's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Like when we talk to Amazon and we kind of learn about their operating pillars or their, what do they call them? Like their operating values. And one of them was fiscal responsibility. Those decisions in terms of like how much they invest in the UX design of the actual platform are like so deeply embedded in the values of the organization. It's intended to be a bit of like a marketplace for bits and bobs. If you started to kind of change the aesthetic design and make it look like what's a good example? Wealth symbol or something like that. I think it would kind of alienate people a little bit. I mean, these are just assumptions, but
yeah, Amazon, it just caters to like speed and efficiency. It's all across their brand, and it comes back to that value. It's the same reason that they built most of their desks out of like IKEA doors and
totally.
Right. Like that's a classic Amazon story when it comes down to the fiscal responsibility side of their business. I don't think their digital is really any different. It's like they do the bare minimum to get it to work, and like nothing more, no flourishes. Like their payment pathway still looks like it's back from the early 2000s, right? And it's a whole overload of information, but it works, and you're only in there to order a product and then you're out. You're not looking for any sort of sticky experience. Speed and the effectiveness of the product of Amazon is what keeps you coming back, and the prices to some extent.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's great for them because then they get data on what sells well. But that's a totally different topic.
Yeah, this is very, you could go very deep in a lot of these avenues that we're talking about.
But I guess the point we're trying to make is aesthetics. It's one part of this. And then there's the research, the planning, the execution. What were those four pillars you mentioned again?
Research, planning, problem identification.
Execution.
Yeah. And I think that when you're doing something that has such high risk, so, any organization that's like, I mean, in general, I feel like design in relation to the web and development is kind of interesting because you can really build anything. And so much of the design process is also just building out what this thing is that you're going to be doing on the web. So it's kind of like a tactile skill as well. Like in our context, design is not just about the aesthetic, but it's also about like, how are you developing this product? What technology are you using? Decisions around like total cost of ownership, hosting, like all of these, like, I'm going to call them, maybe offend some people, but all of these unsexy technology decisions and pathways that you have to go along that are not at all related to, I mean, they are related, but like in people's minds, when they think of design, they think of, creative output, but there's a whole lot of like in the web and technology space, there's a whole lot of engineering that needs to happen as well.
Mm.
And that's just on the, again, on the execution side. You know,
Yeah.
you can't even get to there without having really solid plan and then a lot of really solid research, especially when it comes to like human input, because those people are going to be actually using this thing day to day. So it's pretty unique. It's a pretty unique space, I think, because I think of like other design practices and like, I'm not sure how much time you would need to spend sitting with people that are going to be using whatever it is that you're designing.
I
And
mean, I think industrial design definitely has some resemblance to what we're doing, and that's really the origin of product design altogether. Even
mhm,
what we're doing in UX, I think a lot of our process is borrowed from more of an industrial design practice than
yeah,
that graphic design or communications practice that we were both from back in the day.
mhm,
I liked what you said just about like de-risking stuff, and like it got me thinking. Like design, the framework of any design process is really about that. That's what we're trying to do at each and every stage is de-risk the process, de-risk the investment.
mm,
And, it's like the research is okay, well, what are we, what are we doing? What's our boundary around the work that we're going to be doing? And then problem identification, that de-risks the process because it allows you to say, well, which problem are we going to focus on? We're not going to boil the ocean. We're going to focus on these key problems because we know that they're going to have the biggest amount of business impact. So again, that de-risks the decision making around what to focus on. And then there's the planning, which de-risks the execution process because now you're figuring out, all right, well, we know what problem we're solving. Now, what do we have to do in order to implement these changes? And then there's the execution, which are, there is de-risking involved, but I would say that some of the execution, given that it straddles the like aesthetic boundary a bit, gets a little bit muddier. It's less about de-risking. And I get the sense in our profession that UX has allowed us to try to de-risk aesthetics by like pointing to research and being like, hey, no, like this button, this size,
yeah,
this
yeah,
look and feel will always work the same. It like homogenizes the design practice, but it also gets at something that I think a lot of designers who are in school right now just crave data driven outcomes. No one wants to stand up in a crit and then try to justify something and then like get torn down without the ability of supporting it something. There's always this like turn to, oh, well, the data supports this, the data supports this, rather
yeah.
than saying my gut feeling about this is that, we're going to go with this color and this shape of button, which is it's kind of weird. It's like,
Do you think that happens a lot still?
I think it's just like what I know in our cohort, like back in university, it's what people strove for. Like, if your design was connected to your opinion or your like perspective, it's way easier for someone to come in and tear down your opinion versus someone standing up and saying, we went with this decision because, X% of the audience does this, X% of the
Yeah.
market is doing this,
Well,
right?
I think that's
You can
great.
argue that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm just curious whether a lot of people still design by gut. I think that like for people that have a lot of experience, there's maybe some merit in it, but I kind of see like even website design or anything that's designed for people on the web as kind of similar to decisions that you would make about a business. Like, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to sell this product. Okay, great. Do people want that? You know, like,
Mm.
are you making an assumption? Is this about you, all about you, or is it about for any business decisions, right? Like, is this all about you and your ego and your assumptions, or are you making these decisions because people are actually asking for this? So anytime you have a product or service or anything that's being used by the public or customers or consumers or audiences, Yeah, I mean, there's some small decisions that like kind of become standardized. And as someone with experience, you might be like, okay, yeah, like we should do this because this is just the standard and people are used to it. And I know it's going to work. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of the research part, right? Is like understanding what you're actually doing and why. And to just like make assumptions would be kind of crazy to me.
Yeah,
I was also
no,
thinking about like, sorry, go ahead.
I think at those early stages, like assumptions are really problematic. But
Yeah.
like I think in the later stage of execution, that's where you start bridging the gap between industrial design and something like graphic design and like
Hmm.
layout and aesthetics and emotion and all of that stuff. Because
Hmm.
that's where you start applying the brand and the brand tone and things are a little bit more gray, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even with the even with the brand language, sure, we've got brand guidelines.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's
You have
all
to apply them.
interpretive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, when you were talking about de-risking, I was kind of like thinking about the process and what we do as part of the design process and what is design. And it's kind of like you're decreasing risk. So yeah, you're de-risking and then you're also increasing accuracy on the other side. Like I feel like
Yeah.
when people, when organizations come to us an idea, it's so vague and there's so much risk. And for the first like phase of our process, we're always kind of like trying to help to decrease risk, but then also increase accuracy by doing all of the research and really trying to identify and define like what is it that we're even solving together, like what are we actually building. So anyways, it was just a thought that I had. That accuracy part is something we don't usually talk about. And as we were as you were talking about that, I was like, the one thing that's missing in our language is just like talking about how we help. And I don't even know if that's would make any sense, but increasing the accuracy of what you're actually delivering is such a huge part of the design process.
Yeah. I I love something about that idea. We should
Hmm.
definitely talk about including accuracy because it comes up so often, I'd say, in our work with larger, more like enterprise projects because there's so many shiny things when you're doing a digital transformation or a new product. Like, how do you stay focused? How do you ensure that you're, executing something, like making the right decisions along the
Hmm.
path? Part of what we do now is just like that's just through facilitation. But if we were to have a more concrete framework for saying, like this is how we keep the project accurate, right? And
Yeah.
maybe accurate's the wrong word, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it is because you start off with this idea and then the first phase is, research and talking to the actual consumers. And like, you might start off here and by having those discussions with the people that are actually going to use your product, you start to kind of narrow down to like, oh, okay, this specific thing is what someone wants to be able to do on this web app or this app or whatever. And then you could start to narrow down and refine even more by creating the business model and all that stuff as well. Anyways, it's interesting. It literally just came to mind as we were having this
Hmm.
discussion.
No, it's a good metaphor. It's like accuracy, targets, like the language is all still there. Like
Hmm.
what are you aiming for? What is your goal? Right? How
Yeah.
are you going to hit that goal? How are you going to stay focused on it? The most problematic projects that we've had have been the ones where, organizations have not been able to focus on the core thing at hand. They keep deviating, right? It's like every time you uncover something new, it's like they branch off into 12 different directions. And that's part of the challenge of our role. Like, sure, we're doing the execution, we're doing the research, but largely it's about like walking people back from a
Uh,
ledge.
I
So
was going to
sometimes,
say that, like, I think, and maybe this is just us as like sort of novice entrepreneurs, but I think that the other core part of the design process, or what should be core, is this ability to kind of like pivot and be agile. And I think we do that really well. And I'm not sure if it's like now I'm putting on my business hat. I'm not sure if it's if it's good for the business to be that agile, because versus like being more structured in how you allow people to kind of like flow through your process. But from a strategic standpoint, I think that personally things change so much and there's just so many different directions that you can go with technology, and our context is purely web development. So, and being able to pivot and be agile with your process is very important, I think.
Yeah. And the one piece that's maybe it's like being able to pivot effectively, right? Because you
Hmm.
can always just task
Yeah,
switch like whatever and
totally.
just meander through the process and
Yeah.
just sort of do what's asked of you. But if you're effective with it and you're saying, well, this is actually kind of what you're asking, so we do need to pivot, but this is how we're going to pivot in
Mm.
order to like remediate potential issues of such a big change. And
Yeah.
we've gotten positive feedback, from that one client that was changing up the process on a weekly basis, right?
That was a great example
But
because, like, I think people with organizations with new products, heavily funded, operating at the speed of light, making decisions on a whim every like week that are like would be huge decisions for other organizations, but they're just moving so fast because they've got the funding, they're they've got an amazing market positioning, potential's huge. Yeah, I mean there's just no option. They have to be able to kind
no,
of like pivot and change like on a dime all the time until they get to like a level of maturity where things are a bit more stable and they've kind of like built out a market share and stuff like that.
And I think the last point about pivoting that we've been really effective at, in my opinion, is documentation. Like when we pivot, we make sure that deliverables are labeled as like incomplete or they're like what their status is. They're still deliverables. They're still design artifacts that can be
Mm,
used further down the chain. It means that if you're pivoting from that and then you go and like there's 10 pivots down the line and for some reason you come full circle back to your first direction, you still have that information to leverage. And maybe you'll be reminded of why you deviated from it to begin with.
yeah.
So I think just us as an organization, like we're a bit insane with the level of documentation and design artifacts that we create, but it's a positive.
Yeah. Anyways, let's maybe wrap it up. So I think like in conclusion, what is design? There's the creative output
Complicated.
side of it, and then there's the process side of it. And for us, the process side of it is really about research, problem identification, planning, and the more complex output, the more emphasis that you need to put on those phases. But obviously, it's nuanced, and it's like you need to be agile, and you need to be flexible, and you need to be less rigid with your idea of how you should approach designing a product. And I think from a client side too, because what
Yeah.
you think you want sometimes as a on the client side and what you're kind of stuck on because you just are comfortable with that technology maybe may not actually be the right direction for you. Everyone's obviously has their own use cases, which is a whole other part of the discussion.
Yeah. Technology would be a great discussion to have.
Yeah.
I think just to articulate what you said, like echo it back, it's oftentimes like what you see design wise or what you interpret as design is really just the tip of the iceberg. Like all of the work and research and
Yeah.
planning and technology procurement that has gone into that little like bit above the waterline is immense and it's not easy. It's not always a clear path. So it's just really important that if you're ever evaluating design or you're trying to make a decision based off of design, to not take a product just purely at that face value of aesthetics, right? How does it
Yeah.
look? How does
Yeah.
it feel?
Totally.
Because there's a lot more in the background.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, let's call it on a positive note. um, if you like what you hear and you're interested, subscribe and keep following along because we're going to continue to have more of these discussions. We want to bring on some really great guests too. We've got a couple that we've already recorded that are kind of in process. Yeah, I mean, this is also partly just a passion project for us. So we're really excited to kind of continue down this pathway. Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Marcello.
Okay, thanks. Bye.